Hello and welcome to the LEAP webinar. I'm Christina Podnar, your host for today. Technology isn't good and it's not bad. Inherently, technology is neutral. But in the hands of big tech and presented to a global citizen who may not know or understand the implications, technology can become an opportunity or it can present lingering risk. Today, we're discussing technology, what it means to the global citizen, and how to get that balance of risk and opportunity correct. To get perspective on this topic, we have with us Dr. Ian Pearson, a futurist and an artist, Benoit Lebeau, a senior policy advisor for France's Ministry of the Environment, and Azam Alameddin, Director of Public Policy for MENA and Turkey from Facebook. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
It's great to see all of you today. And I want to dive in right with you, Ian. I'm looking at big tech spending. It's millions of dollars on advertising, PR, lobbying. We know what messages and feelings they want their brands to convey. But what we don't really know is their real vision. Will they be driven by the relentless pursuit of profit? Will they make a collective dent in our society's most pressing problems? Or will they contribute to bettering the lives of individuals around the globe? As a futurist, somebody who's looking into the future, where do you see big tech in maybe 20 or 30 years from now?
It's interesting because the last 25, 30 years, we've seen the purpose of a big corporation was to make money. That's all it was for. That's what companies were designed for. And yet the last couple of years, they've discovered that actually they've got quite a lot of power, especially companies like social media companies and the big IT companies. And so, you think about what's the purpose of making lots of money. It's because you want lots more power. And so I think that it's heading that direction. And we've also seen a lot of the debate over the last 20, 30 years whether the future would be governed by traditional governments or big tech would suddenly take over and become the more powerful institutions. But actually, it's looking increasingly like it's a partnership between big government and big companies. So, for example, during the COVID crisis, we've seen an awful lot of the big pharmaceutical companies and the big IT companies getting into bed with the big government and actually working as a partnership. And it looks increasingly like the future might be dominated by this ongoing partnership of the politicians with the big companies. And the big companies, of course, already have quite a noticeable political bias, mostly towards the left, but a few towards the right, perhaps. And that's increasingly likely to continue, I think, over the next 20, 30 years. So maybe by 2050, we'll have a very strong partnership of big companies and government running the societies of our future, rather than one or the other, which is what we used to think it would be. So they're no longer competing; they're more of a partner now. And instead of just going straight for the money, which is a route to getting power, they're realizing that actually they've got the platforms to get power directly. So companies like Google and Apple and Facebook have discovered that they can actually wield power directly by influencing how people think and controlling how they vote in elections and so on, much more than just by spending some money lobbying a few politicians here and there to wield influence in that way. So we've seen some shortcutting of the way we used to think it was going to be. And it no longer looks as simple as government versus big tech. It's now government plus big tech versus the consumer, with both of those running the gathering power and influencing people directly via the platforms that they've got. So that's a new way of things emerging, which we really didn't expect even 5 years ago, which is really quite new, but might well continue for decades. So that's how I think it's going to be for the next 15, 20 years. Maybe by 2050, it'll start reversing again, but certainly for the next decade or two, it's likely to continue going down that path.
So what does that really mean to the average global citizen, thinking about it from an individual perspective, in terms of income, in terms of well-being, in terms of health, in terms of our environment? There's a lot of considerations, and we have solidification, is what I'm hearing from you, of power, and it's really not with a citizen, it's really with government and big tech.
Yes. I mean, certainly in terms of incomes and so on, we're already starting to see the big companies realizing that during lockdown, people started working from home. So, why buy people from this region at expensive first world rates when we can just outsource this to an Eastern European countries or a developing country and pay a fraction of the money for the same sort of expertise? So in incomes, what we're going to see is ordinary commoditized jobs will see that their income levels will go down to a global mean. And for the very few people who are really the elite people on whom your entire corporate profits depend, you're going to be paying through the nose for those. The superstar salaries for the absolute elite, the 0.1% people that your company really depends on, will get paid twice, 3 times, 4 times as much money. And the rest of us on the jobs where you can find millions of people with the same ability around the world, a lot of those will be in cheaper labor countries, and why not outsource to them? So in terms of labor rates, we'll see some commoditization of the normal people and some extreme celebrity salaries at the other end. In terms of wielding power, that's a very direct thing. So you can actually, companies like Google and Facebook and Samsung and so on are already discovering that they can put the COVID passports, for example, into your digital wallets. So they're discovering that they can leverage their existing political motivations directly using their platforms and force this tendency towards authoritarian behavior that we're already seeing. And that could become quite extreme. It's not necessarily a good thing because we've resisted authoritarianism generally in the West for the last 15, 20 years. But, government has always wanted to get us with ID cards and so on. And it just so happens that a lot of the big companies, their profit margins depend on doing that too. So they're quite happy to go in partnership with government and force these things through. And us as poor little consumers, we have very little choice. If you want a digital wallet, you've got no control as to what the big companies will put in that. So we just have to accept what we're given, especially if the big government backs that up with having fines and banning you from doing anything unless you comply. So together, the big company is giving the big government more control to introduce an authoritarian type regime, which we're seeing enormous enthusiasm for worldwide, thanks to the campaigns of fear-mongering that we've seen during the COVID campaign. So COVID has been an ideal excuse for the coming together of the big companies and the big government, which have wanted to do a lot of things but haven't had the means to do so. And so that's probably the worst consequence of COVID after you've taken account of the people that have obviously died from it. It's the second worst consequence.
Benoit, I want to turn to you a little bit here, because what we just heard Ian talk about is the consolidation of power between big tech and big government. But that also implies individual countries, individual governments, even if they are sort of big, if you will. But as we look to things such as the ecological aspects of big tech, and we think about societal impact from an environmental perspective, what does this really mean? I mean, we've heard Apple say that it plans to make supply chain and product carbon neutral changes so that they're meeting their standards by 2030. In 2019, we heard Amazon unveil a climate plan that aims to get the company to meet the decarbonization requirements of the Paris Agreement 10 years early. And of course, Facebook also had indicated that it reached net zero emissions ahead of its original plans. So thinking about big tech, how should we be holding big tech accountable for societal safety around issues that aren't parsable? We can't give them to one country or another because we all share the same environment.
Absolutely. And in this world, if we have one big problem ahead of us, it's got to be climate change. You very well know that we are reaching a point where planet Earth is warming more rapidly than we ever thought it would. And we are all concerned. And typically, the responsibility of the big tech is very important because they contribute, they consume energy, they emit greenhouse gas emission in their activities. So all what you describe about engagement to reach carbon neutrality by 2030, all this is very much welcome. It's only one part of what needs to be done. We not only have to decarbonize typically the big tech activity. We have to decarbonize the whole world. And this is where we miss maybe some of the global governance that Ian was mentioning. There is a global governance from the big tech, but there isn't such global governance from the national government. We are still in a world of competition, and look at the UN, how difficult in the UN the discussion is to just reach to establish some common target for greenhouse gas emissions. So the role of big tech is particularly important, and the role of IT in particular, because on one hand, IT contributes to the growing need of more energy. And if we don't pay attention, big tech is contributing typically today, big tech, IT, reach 4% of the greenhouse gas emission. This is more than what aviation is contributing to climate change. And we know that we have to bring the whole world to carbon neutrality between now and 2050. So not only we have to decarbonize the IT sector, but we have to decarbonize all the other sectors. And the beauty of IT is that IT can come in support to any of the other sectors, mobility, production, city planning. All this can benefit from more support from the IT to decarbonize. Are we there yet? Not quite. But I really hope that as we progress on a global scene to address global change like climate change, as we learn to work together to build this governance, I think there's a more coherent governance on the private sector. I really hope that we're gonna make IT a tool for reaching this big ecological transition that we have no choice but to obtain. And I really hope that we will reduce the impact of the IT sector itself through engagement and so on.
That sounds great, Benoit, but I'm thinking to myself, while we need to address global warming, it seems impossible to do so without causing other environmental problems, right? If we go from nuclear, which has waste, to solar, which industrializes the deserts, power lines and wind farms that are unsightly, how do we prioritize these? Who prioritizes them? And from a policy perspective, how do we even get started in that conversation?
I'm thinking that this world is the greatest transition is to move away from a world of limited resources to a world of unlimited resources. The unlimited resources that we have ahead of us typically are the renewable energy, but it's also the knowledge. And IT is greatly in place, it's greatly positioned to make us aware of the situation. Because sometimes we are lacking data to understand what decision can be taken. So the world is complex. Climate change is very complex. But oftentimes we are missing links between cause and consequences. We don't know how much of our activities in our daily life contribute in terms of greenhouse gas emission. And suddenly, IT can help us make sure that we have some visibility, can bring together with big data and artificial intelligence, can put in front of us the indicators, the radar that will help us take individual and collective decisions. So we have to move to this knowledge economy, and the sooner the better. And this can only happen with big tech as a service to the big energy transition.
As I'm even patiently waiting and standing by, you're nodding your head, and I see you nodding your head. As we're talking about the knowledge economy and really making each one of us aware of things like ecological and other societal concerns, tell us a little bit about how you see Facebook's role, or how does Facebook really see itself kind of going ahead, and what role does Facebook think that it's going to play within that knowledge economy and empowering the global citizen, if in fact that's the objective?
So I was listening attentively because a lot of these areas are covered absolutely by a company like Facebook, and we can speak about that in a minute. But I wanted to highlight a couple of important points here. So when we talk about partnerships, there are important elements in the ecosystem. And Ian alluded to the big tech companies and governments, but the ecosystem is never complete without the communities, the other partners, the individuals, the users, the businesses. All of these, what we call community for us, are essential to complete the circle of the ecosystem as we think about our role. Maybe let me take the following angle of describing how we see ourselves contributing here. So there are 4 key elements or pillar through which we contribute. One is the mere presence of the platform. So the platform or the family of apps that Facebook has, in being available for our users, enable people to use these apps to connect with their loved ones, but also to connect with what's going on in the world and collect news and knowledge. So that in itself is one important pillar as we see it. So today we have 2.85 billion users. These users have access to knowledge, absolutely huge database and knowledge base for them to use from, but also to connect with others and to ask questions and to be interactive to learn and gain knowledge. The second important element here is the products and tools that Facebook offers. So, and I'll give you just a couple of examples. The videos and the live streams tool that we have on our platform that enables people to talk, to tell their story to the world and to ask questions and to challenge the status quo is absolutely essential here. The fundraising tools to help people, to help communities, the other products that we have for to give equal opportunity for all our users, whether they're visually impaired or have hearing difficulties and so on. So the inclusiveness for everyone in our community to gain that knowledge access it should not be undermined. And the third and other important element here is the outreach. So on top of the existence of the platform itself and the products that we offer, the outreach through certain initiatives that continue to be offered by us. So obviously I come from the Middle East and North Africa and Turkey region. So, but what I'm speaking for, the products and the reach out that we make are true across the globe. For instance, the COVID-19 Information Center that was established, and Ian alluded to COVID-19 at the beginning. But these centers are actually, they have directed since the start of the pandemic 2 billion people to the World Health Organization and other health services to understand what resources they have to protect themselves. So they're not only to governments, they're to governments and to healthcare services around the world. Then the communication, yes, between government, but also between businesses through WhatsApp chatbots with individuals and with people is another important tool. And then importantly for us, and particularly in our region, but again, this is true elsewhere, the economic impact offerings that we make to bring in everybody to this knowledge-based economy, and particularly micro and small businesses. So we have a particular program tailor-made for small and medium businesses and micro businesses in some countries, which we call Boost with Facebook. This gives them training, awareness, access to the digital platform to be able to establish their businesses and grow them and market their businesses, but also have access to the bigger businesses and the bigger sources of knowledge and information. And I'll give you an example here, because also I think Ian alluded to this at the beginning, which is the business element. Not many people know that we have 200 businesses that are connected to our platform. Only 5% of them, 5% of 200 million, use paid ads. So the rest, 95%, use the platform free of charge. So I mentioned the availability of the platform. I mentioned the tools that we offer, and then the reach out programs. And the fourth and other important element here is the integrity of the platform. So the integrity is very important against fake news, against misinformation, against, of course, hate speech and violence and all of that, and incitement. But what's important to mention about that integrity is we have drafted and developed clear, publicly available and transparent community standards for our users to understand what's permissible and what's not on the platform. And we have used technology and innovation to enable the enforcement of those community standards. So artificial intelligence is a very important element in this equation. And then on top of the policies and the use of technology, the actual development of those community standards are all about engagement with our communities and not only, so there's the subject matter experts that we engage with, but there are also the civil society, the businesses, and all different elements in society that we make sure that we engage, because at the end of the day, they are the users of this platform and they are the ones who help this platform grow. So I want to pause here, but I can talk a little bit also about the climate change element and other initiatives that Facebook has launched. I know Benoit spoke at length about it, but let me pause here at this point.
Yeah, let's pause there, but I want to come back to that point in a moment. But before we do that, Ian, I want to come back to you because I'm hearing a little bit of a dichotomy here. Azam has painted a picture for us of community engagement, bringing folks together around the globe, not just in our own countries, in our own society at the micro level. But it seems very likely, as you mentioned, that social media are contributing to polarization in our society. But this is also kind of good for social media companies if we think about that. So, right, engagement is a good way to get, or enragement is a good way to get engagement. Assuming that it's true, right, how should social media companies trade off the effects of their policies on the company and society? And does that change your thinking about the potential outcomes of where we might stand in 30 to 40 years?
Yeah, I think companies like Facebook, Google used to be in that area as well, but they failed. So Facebook's really the only area we've got left. LinkedIn have opted out and they've decided to go for the business side of things. But Facebook is where people exchange the social stuff, but also the political things. And, climate change is one of the political things now. It isn't just a scientific domain. And where I think the boundary should be is that, Facebook is perfectly well positioned to police things like hate crimes. So when people are being nasty to other people or slugging off a particular minority group or whatever, Facebook are quite justified in trying to clamp down on that because that's not good for society. Where I think that they should opt out of doing that is trying to intervene in what is the correct science and what is not correct science. I don't think Facebook is the arbiter of what is good science. So when I see companies, I'm not accusing Facebook of this, but there's a temptation for big IT companies to say, well, this is disinformation and this is accurate. And at the moment, it's very much anything which is proselytizing climate doom is really good, and we've got to panic and we've got to do everything by 2050. And anything which puts any other view that, nuclear fusion's coming along, the solar farms in the Sahara might be coming along with super cables. This might not be the end of the world. There are solutions to it. anyone that's producing that sort of view is being clamped down on. And as a scientist, engineer, I really find that is a counterproductive thing. I think that Facebook is a perfect platform for encouraging vigorous debate, and science depends on vigorous debate. There isn't any such thing as settled science. Settled science is, you might get 99% of people agreeing with something within science, and someone like Einstein comes along and says something different, and he's correct. 99% disagree with him, and they would have him pushed off the platform in today's model. But actually, Einstein turned out to be right on relativity and a few other things. And he said, there's no point in saying there's 1,000 people disagree. If one person disagrees, that's quite sufficient if they're correct. And that's the way it should really be. We should have a platform which encourages scientific debate. I would say, I'm very concerned about climate change too, but I've also looked at things from the other point of view, which most of the climate science community ignores, which is the impact of solar cycles. We're currently going through a very weak solar cycle that causes increased cloud cover, for example, which has a very negative effect on global temperature and might give us a couple of extra decades to play with to solve the climate change problem, which takes away the need for panic. At the moment, I might say, well, the 2050, maybe it's 2070. And that's really important if the nuclear fusion technologies are going to come on stream in the 2040s, because it might mean that what we currently think mostly is a complete catastrophe and future doom might actually be a fairly manageable problem. And if it's a fairly manageable problem, and we don't know for certain, but it might be, then we shouldn't really be trashing our economies to deal with this until we know a little bit better. And CERN did a lot of research in the early 2010s and found that, yes, there's a lot of evidence for the contributions of solar cycles in this. And the evidence goes back thousands of years. And they've actually found some of the mechanisms. So, we should be putting that in. But the climate models generally ignore that sort of stuff, and they just look at CO2. So they come up with catastrophic futures, which really don't look very plausible to a number of us in the scientific community. And if we're not allowed to have that debate on social media because Facebook or Google or Twitter decides that, we've got to go for this doom-mongering future and ignore everybody else and label them as disinformation or, as, climate denialists or otherwise hide them under the carpet, that is not a way that science can flourish. We need to get a future which maintains the environment, but also maintains our economies and global well-being for everybody in it as much as possible. And really, if you just ostracize a large bunch of the scientists who might be the ones that know what they're talking about, that's not a good thing. So we need to have vigorous science. We need to have vigorous debate. And the social media companies should encourage that. And they should not be the arbiters on what is good science and bad science. The scientists should be the ones arguing with each other and slagging off each other's papers and finding bugs in it. That's how science progresses. You can't do that if the social media companies are locking out one side of that community. So, Facebook can provide a very, very strong role. I might disagree with Benoit on some of the future consequences of climate change. We both want to have a successful environment. We both want to do the best for the world. We probably disagree a little bit on how to do that. I'm very enthusiastic about fusion and nuclear power as a way of getting to this future. A lot of environmentalists want to bury nuclear power for various reasons. We should be able to have these debates in an open forum without the social media companies saying, well, we like you and we don't like you, so you're allowed to talk, but you're not. That isn't the way we should progress. So the social media companies could be very, very helpful in this. And we need to make sure that they realize that helpful role does not mean that they're taking sides, because, the social media companies are not the climate change scientists, and they aren't the physicists who are disagreeing with them and the astrophysicists and so on. They need to have this vigorous debate for science to flourish. And as a scientist engineer, I haven't got a particular axe to grind on this. I just want the experts to be able to argue with each other as they have for centuries and do that properly and label which bits of the science are good and which bits we genuinely should throw in the bin. That's how science progresses. We mustn't interfere with that. Otherwise, we end up with politics instead of science. And that's not a favor for anybody. Politics is not the way to protect the environment.
Benoit, any interest, do you think, from regulators to have this debate, and certainly on the social media platforms such as Facebook? Should social media have a role in policymaking and moving the needle on the environment? How do you see that playing out?
Well, we obviously need to debate. We need to negotiate. But we don't negotiate with Mother Earth. We don't negotiate with the reality of climate change today. There is no more time for that. We know that we are already facing some serious challenge. And by the way, there are already many solutions available to us now. We can very rapidly decarbonize some of the activities and without waiting for some new high-tech like fusion power to be available. So I'm fully supportive of the negotiation, but we have no time to negotiate with Mother Earth. This is, we have to act now because the risk of not acting is in front of us today. You know, the world is typically cooking now. And we have to, the more we build science, the more we encourage science, the more we encourage a debate, that's fine. But we need also to take action, and action can be taken now. All Facebook and Google, you know, they have their own target for greenhouse gas reduction. This is very much welcome. I wish this can bring this can help many other big corporations to move in the right direction. Let's not wait till we have a perfect understanding of all what's going on in the atmosphere and around planet Earth. Let's not wait till we have a fusion power of some sort. We have enough solution in our hand now. What we are missing, however, is a common vision, it's a global platform, it's a global government. As I said earlier, big corporations, they have a global strategic worldwide view. This is not the case at the political level, at the policy level. Each government think and protect its own territory and economy. And we have to improve, we have to learn how to work together and move in the proper direction. Though I think we are facing some serious challenge.
But does social media help us do that? Back to Ian's point, you know, if you had more open debate, if you had more people talking at least, does that actually increase awareness, understanding? Do we actually get to some solution faster? Or is it okay to kind of continue doing business as usual and waiting? Because I don't really know, and maybe you know something that I don't, but I don't know that global governance is going to come anytime soon.
No, unfortunately, the UN exists. You know, it's been there for almost 70 years, but it's not yet in a position to lead the global discussion. We can agree with some government. It's very tedious. I don't know about what we can expect from the social media at all level. The more we discuss, the better, that's for sure. But we also should not delay action. Today, we have so many solutions available now. So discussion should not delay the decision to progress in the right direction. We have to promote energy efficient system at every level, from the data server to the end users. We have to promote renewable energy, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, whenever, because you know what? They are less costly now to produce electricity. But we also need to be smart in the way we design cities, mobility, infrastructure of any sort, and any industry, we can be smart. And this is part of the knowledge economy, by the way. So all this is in our hand. And let's not wait till we have a perfect agreement. And I just hope the social media can help bring the best practice in the head of everyone, of every decision maker. Individuals, communities, businesses are all concerned by this big transition. What we are missing is to have access to the proper information, the proper visibility, and the solution. So maybe, yes, my answer to your question is that social media can at least help share the best practices that we need to engage for the transition.
So Azam, I want you to weigh in here and tell us how you see Facebook really helping in this specific climate arena, and what is it that Facebook ought to do in terms of helping the global conversation. But at the same time, I also want to emphasize the fact that not everybody has access yet to Facebook, right? So it's not the only solution out there, but for your role specifically, how will you contribute to this global conversation? Will you make a commitment to have some of this dialogue, to have some of this debate that Ian was talking about in order to bring about solutions faster, sooner, easier?
So debate is already happening. Let me just highlight a couple of important points here. I want to make it clear that we never claim to be perfect. We never claim to say we've reached, the level where we're extremely comfortable that everything is right when it comes to debate on the platform and the users, how they express themselves and all of that. But what we know is we have clear principles: A, to give people a voice, and B, to serve everyone. And we aspire to make that happen in collaboration with the ecosystem that I mentioned. So for instance, we want to work with our partners in government, business, communities, experts, to preserve what is best about the open, accessible internet and encourage competition and innovation. That's very clear for Facebook. But we want to do that while protecting people's privacy and preventing harm. Now, how do we get there? Is of course a big debate, but I'll give you an example here. For instance, on climate change, we want to help the community, our community, to access the best information possible. And I think this is what the gentlemen here have alluded to. From 200 different leading organizations and experts working on climate change, right? So there is already a diversity there. There's already accessibility to different sources of knowledge and information in this. We've launched the Climate Science Information Center, which is a separate and dedicated space on Facebook that connects our community with actual resources. So again, maybe we can do more to raise the awareness of our community to these available tools. Maybe we can lean in more on our partners and communities to spread the word so that people do have access, and not only those who are interested in climate change that will search for it and go and have access. So maybe there is more space here to do in terms of raising awareness. And we've created, by the way, in the wider Europe, Middle East, and Africa region at Facebook, a new department for sustainability. And climate change is one of its top priorities. And there is a lot of work that's going on now and accelerating on this front. And a couple of other points I wanted to highlight here. So the internet needs new rules. When we say open space for debate, I think this has been the position of Facebook. It has long argued that we need to make sure that there's a new regulation on privacy, elections, harmful content, and data portability. So we don't think one company or a group of companies or one government or group of governments should own that space and regulate it in isolation of the ecosystem. So we support that position to begin with. But while there's a lot of work that's been going on for maybe over a decade on that front, Facebook is not waiting for that regulation, that quote unquote good inclusive regulation to take place. But we've also taken steps ahead of it. For example, we've given people more information and control over how our algorithm system works, right? And we have set up an independent oversight board to rule on the difficult decisions around content, for instance. So people and community have tools and means to challenge even some of Facebook's actions on their accounts or on the platform. So the access is there, the opportunity is there. Maybe there is an opportunity for more awareness and more spreading more information to our communities about these available tools.
So Azam, are you saying that you would actually be willing and interested in having open and free debates without any kind of moderation from Facebook? Back to Ian's point, right, where we're actually having very good, sound scientific debates, again, within reason, right? But open and very transparent debates around hot topic issues with whoever wants to participate from the scientific community. Is that something that you would welcome?
I think this is already happening, Christina. So it won't be something new. So as I mentioned earlier, so when we develop a community standard,
is it happening at mass scale though? I mean, or is it just sort of small groups of folks? Because I think, Ian, you were talking about something much larger, it seemed like.
Yeah, no, it's happening with groups of experts and round tables. But at a mass scale, I think this is something that needs to be discussed again within the wider ecosystem. It's not for one company alone to take ownership of this. It has to be a debate, but we can certainly have further conversations about this, because there are different views as well as you know about how to ensure that balance between openness and safety. This is one of the toughest issues to have when you have a big platform, right? And that balance sometimes can easily go over one direction at the expense of the other.
And that's actually one of the big challenges, right? You mentioned a few minutes ago that we don't have a single regulator for the ecosystem of social media. We don't have a single global government that's going to, or regulator that's going to come down and say, look, this is how to do this. So barring that, who else is left in the vacuum? I mean, it sounds to me like Facebook is the one who has to arbitrate all of this, because we're not going to anytime soon get to a point where we actually have the ability for governments to get together and say, here's what we really agree
on. This is a question to me,
yes,
Christina.
I would love to hear your perspective. Yeah.
No, this is, I would argue that, yes, maybe there isn't one clear body, but there are multiple bodies that can pursue this debate. For instance, there are international organizations that are specialized on the environment on the one hand, right? But there are also international organizations that specialize on internet governance and the internet. And then there's the United Nations and human rights and freedom of expression, but also safety and protection. So I think there is an ecosystem. The question is, how do we bring this together under one roof or within one platform to discuss these regulations? But it's not a complete vacuum in the sense of who can regulate. So these are the intergovernmental organizations, and then you have the big tech companies, and then you have also the scientists and the experts and so on. It is there. How to convene it, I think this is debatable, but it can start somewhere with these big regulatory umbrellas, if you will.
Ian, do you think that's realistic? Do you think we need to actually have some kind of a convening of all of these key stakeholders? Or how do you see that impacting what the outcome might be with not just the environment, but a lot of these societal issues, in the coming decades?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big favor in getting all of the stakeholders involved. But let's face it, very few of the stakeholders actually understand how the system works. I mean, climate science, as we've all observed, is incredibly complicated. Nobody understands all of it. And the climate scientists only ignore part of it as well, only understand part of it too. They seem to disagree on large quantities of stuff with the astrophysicists who look at the other impacts like galactic cosmic radiation on cloud formation and so on. There isn't a single community that understands all of this, and we're still trying to figure out atmospheric chemistry. There are a lot of unknowns in here. And one of the problems we have is that we jump to short-term solutions because they seem to solve it. And everybody, as Benoit was saying, we need to do this right now. Everybody's panicking, so we've got to solve this. We can't afford to wait for this. We've got to do something right away. In my view, that isn't a good solution because it's kind of like somebody standing on the top of a cliff right next to the edge. And everybody's saying, "Oh, you're at the very edge of a cliff. You got to, you got to move. You got to get away from there, or you're going to die." But he's wearing a blindfold. The prudent thing for that guy to do is to take off the blindfold and work out which direction the drop is before he decides which way to move. If you do that too early, you have a 50% chance of falling off the cliff. And I've seen again and again very well-meaning environmentalists suggesting things that we should do, which end up damaging the environment. If you don't understand what you're doing, you're as likely to do harm as you are to do good. I'm all in favor of solving the climate change thing. I'm not a denialist. I've invented several new technologies in wind harvesting and so on. I've got my own designs of wind turbines. I want to solve this too. But I think it's a complicated complicated situation. And we don't understand the science completely. We can't afford to wait forever. But, we already know that the science says already, and even the IPC admit, that their climate models are running far too hot and that actually the real world is not moving that hot. So it's not actually that big a problem compared to what we've been told in the media, which are latching on to the worst case possible scenarios and presenting that as absolute fact. They aren't fact. Those are extremely unlikely scenarios. The real life scenarios that we're much more likely to head towards are much more modest, a fraction of a degree rise rather than several degrees rise, a little bit of sea level rise and so on. They're not unmanageable. And this gives us to 2045, 2050. We probably will have the nuclear fusion things coming on stream. We certainly will have far more efficient solar panels. We will also have the super cables to bring in cables between Africa, for example, and North and Southern Europe. And if you put a solar panel currently in the UK, if you put that in the Sahara Desert, you're going to get 5 times more energy. If you've got the right cables, you can get all of that into the European grid. There are far better ways of doing what we're currently doing. So you get far more result for the same bucks. So, I'm very much in favor of getting the biggest bang for a buck. So you solve the environmental problems with the least amount. So you need to know how long have we got. And realistically, we've got to 2050, 2060 to solve this because of the solar panel, solar effects with the reduced solar activity. This gives us long enough to develop those technologies like very efficient solar panels, the super cables to get the energy from the Sahara into Europe, get fusion on stream. We have the science and the technology coming along. Almost certainly will arrive on time. So what exactly is the point of throwing all of our money at very inefficient, extraordinarily expensive technologies and trashing our economies while watching countries like China putting in new coal power stations, and even countries like Germany putting in new coal power stations because they're determined to switch off nuclear? We're doing all the wrong things to solve it. Yes, we need to solve it, but we've got more time to do it properly. So let's take a bit more time, do it right, solve the problem, and still maintain our good quality societies and allow us to have enough money left over to protect the rest of the environment. We don't need to destroy the world to solve climate change. We can do it more sensibly, and that's all I'm asking for.
Well, I think we definitely have a lot of diverse perspectives today, and I appreciate that because I think that there's a lot of room for debate, and we should have that debate. But I think we're running a little bit short on time. So what I want to do is do a really quick lightning round and then ask you a few questions from our audience. So really quickly, yes or no answers. I'm going to start with you, Azam. For better or worse, should we be regulating big tech in order to get good outcomes on either climate or on privacy or on any other topic? Should we be regulating, yes or no?
With an inclusive regulation, the answer is yes.
Great. Ian, going to you. Yes or
Yes.
no? And from you, Benoit.
Absolutely yes, a big yes.
All right. So we have 3 yeses today. So here we are in agreement on something. That's wonderful. Let me really quickly go to our audience and ask, are you just for a little bit more time and give us some of your perspectives on some of these questions, because I think they're great. First question, and I think we'll go to you, Ian, because I think you'll have an opinion on this one. With the aggressive pace of technology evolution, how do we educate swaths of our population about the coming waves of technology, and do we need to, especially given the fact that today's citizen doesn't yet fully understand technology or its implications?
Yeah, I think we do need to. We don't have very much education of the consequences. Some of the consequences are quite hidden. I mean, when you look at the companies like Facebook, I mean, I'm perfectly willing to believe that Facebook wants to make the world a better place. I'm sure that they do. But we need to understand how that impacts on social structures and politics and so on. People don't understand these things, and therefore we should be educating people on the second order and third order effects and getting their inputs on whether they think this is a good or a bad thing and what they would like to go this way or what they would like to go that way. Public need to be involved. They are stakeholders. They have to live with this. They should have that impact, and it shouldn't be reserved to the top 1% elite scientists and engineers who understand this stuff because they're dealing with it every day. Yes, they're important, but they should not be making the decisions on the behalf of all the rest of society. They should be explaining what that means and getting their input too.
Great. Going to you, Azam, really quickly, lightning session here. Along with digital transformation, we're also seeing inequality on the rise. About 35% of the world's population is not using the internet, which is a significant number. Who should address the growing divide between haves and have-nots, and does Facebook take a position on that?
So Facebook has a full department that's called connectivity, and it's I mentioned earlier the responsible innovation department that is inclusive, but there's one particularly on connectivity and access to internet. So, and this is part of the policy dialogue as well that we're having. We have a big role to play. We feel, and Ian, I think you were alluding to the subsea cable, and Facebook is also a key stakeholder in that infrastructure. So there are several connectivity initiatives that we drive as Facebook to include more people and give them accessibility. But I think there's also again, and I don't want to repeat the word ecosystem because it comes. I repeat it a lot because it is the reality. You have regulators that need to come up with conducive policies and regulations that enable competition and innovation to bring easier internet accessibility to those who are left behind and make it very accessible, affordable, with different levels of options to choose from.
Great, thank you. And Benoit, I'm going to finish off our conversation today with a question for you here from our audience members. The combined power usage of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Apple is about the same as or as much as New Zealand, which is significant. How do you think we can deal with that? Is it fair to give each company a certain amount of tokens or coins to use towards power and energy usage and then turn them off at a certain point? Or should they continue to have unlimited access to power?
All the engagement of the big tech are very much welcome vis-à-vis climate change, but it's not enough. It is not enough. It's the only consumer part of, and oftentimes they switch to renewable energy. This is fine, but we need renewable energy for every other use, from space heating to mobility. And it is more important for me to make sure that we understand that addressing climate change comes with many benefits. Lower, better air quality, so less local pollution, and job creation. A lot of jobs job can be created by just addressing climate change. Stop deforestation, enhance productivity at all levels. So we need big corporations to engage in the transition, but what counts is to bring the whole economy in all the possible sector in the same dynamics. So as much as I enjoy and happy when I hear that there's some new commit from some big tech, I know that the problem is elsewhere. And how do we bring that to the rest of the world is a serious question we need to ask ourselves. Once again, we don't negotiate with Mother Earth. And if the science on climate change has been wrong, is on the severity. What is happening, what we are witnessing today, is more severe, more concerned, more serious than what the scientists has told us. So I think there is a serious need now to act. And we can act, and the benefits are much greater than just greenhouse gas reduction. It is about wealth, job creation, maintaining decent air quality all over, and so on and so forth, and better health for everyone, better cities for everyone, and so on.
That's a great way to summarize today's conversation and a great start to the next debate that I'm sure we'll have soon. Gentlemen, thank you again for your time today. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.